Welcome to this explainer. Now, I want you to imagine just for a second standing right on the edge of a rapidly shifting political landscape. You're feeling the centuries-old institutions you swore to protect slowly fracturing right beneath your feet. Well, that is exactly where I and my fellow senators stood over 2,000 years ago. Today, we are stepping back in time, and I'm going to guide you through the absolutely terrifying reality of our republic's collapse, exactly as I witnessed it from the Senate floor. We're going to look closely at how one man's unmatched ambition literally brought a thriving democratic system to its knees. Beware the Ides of March. You know, that chilling warning still echoes in my mind. It was this incredibly dark omen of the bloody climax that shattered our political system forever. But how on earth did we get to that horrific day? To truly understand the collapse of our beloved Rome, we have to rewind. We need to understand the slow, creeping dread that infected the ruling elite as we watched this one man rise to the very top.
Section 1. The Young Noble's Ambition.
So, Julius Caesar didn't just magically appear out of nowhere as a tyrant, right? He was very much a product of Rome's insanely cutthroat political arena. We watched him grow from this young patrician, a noble dreaming of eternal greatness, into an absolutely dangerously brilliant speaker. In Rome, power was the ultimate currency, and let me tell you, he knew exactly how to spend it. But the real danger, the real shift, took root when he became a military commander up in Gaul. He just kept racking up these massive victories, conquering hundreds of tribes, amassing unimaginable wealth. And actually, here's a really fascinating detail that isn't often discussed. His men didn't just rigidly revere him. They had this tight bond. They even sang these mocking, affectionate songs about his baldness during his big triumphal parades. It was a terrifyingly intimate, fiercely loyal bond. We applauded him at first, of course we did. But as all that gold and glory poured into the city, well, that applause quickly faded into deep, deep suspicion. Moving on to Section 2, the threat of loyal armies. Our initial admiration turned into creeping panic as we realized a fundamental shift was happening right under our noses. For centuries, the traditional Roman way dictated that a soldier's ultimate loyalty was strictly to the state, to the republic. But Caesar? He created a terrifying new reality, soldiers who were loyal exclusively to the individual. He essentially built what modern listeners would immediately recognize as a cult of personality. His veterans weren't fighting for Rome anymore. They were basically a heavily armed loyalist militia fighting only for Caesar. For us sitting in the Senate, it was completely paralyzing. Think about it. How do you govern a republic when the single strongest military force within your borders only answers to one man?
Section 3. Crossing the Rubicon River.
The ultimate test of our institutional norms finally came when we officially ordered him to give up his command. We demanded that he disband his forces and return to Rome as a regular private citizen. Instead, he forced a devastating domino effect. First, he flatly disobeyed. Second, he took a fateful step. He marched his army right across the Rubicon River. Now, that river was the sacred boundary of Italy. Bringing an army across it wasn't just a political statement, it was absolute treason, a point of no return. And third, he ignited a brutal civil war. You can actually easily compare this to the most extreme partisan power grabs you see today, where political rivals completely torch the rulebook to seize total control. He entirely shattered our norms, plunging Romans into fighting fellow Romans.
I just watched helplessly from the Senate as our world basically burned down around us. Friends became bitter enemies overnight. The very survival of our democratic institutions hung by a ridiculously fragile thread. Let me tell you, it is a deeply terrifying thing to sit there and watch the government you have dedicated your entire life to just unravel right in front of your eyes. And at the end of all the bloodshed, all the chaos, only one man was left standing.
Section 4. Dictatorship and controversial reforms. After the Civil War ended, Caesar emerged completely victorious. And the Senate? We were entirely sidelined, paralyzed really by what he was doing with his new supreme power. Now, admittedly, some of his controversial reforms were actually quite effective. He streamlined the government, and he even significantly improved our calendar. That 365-day reform he implemented, that actually still impacts your world today. But we couldn't appreciate it at the time. Why? Because a man who can literally change time itself is a man with entirely too much power. We were blinded by this deep, pervasive fear of his unchecked ambition, and we were living in absolute terror as he systematically erased the republic's checks and balances. But as history constantly proves, unchecked power breeds incredibly desperate enemies. Caesar acted as though he was completely invincible, but secretly, in the shadows, we, in the ruling elite, began to plan a way out. The whispers in the Senate halls grew louder,
and much deadlier. A lot of us truly believed that if Rome was going to survive this, the dictator simply had to be removed.
Section 5. Beware the Ides of March.
Which brings us right back to that fateful day, March 15th, 44 BCE. As he confidently entered the Senate floor, the air in that room was unbearably thick. If you were there, you could literally taste the unspoken dread and paranoia. He walked in fully assuming he was the untouchable master of Rome, completely unaware of the daggers hidden beneath the togas of the very men who stood up to greet him. In a sudden, incredibly chaotic flash of violence, the conspirators closed in. They surrounded him entirely. Now, this wasn't some noble battlefield execution. It was a desperate, bloody betrayal by the politicians who feared him the most. Put in simple terms for modern listeners, a group of lawmakers literally ambushed and assassinated their own head of state in the middle of a government building. And in a twist of profound, almost unbelievable irony, the absolute ruler of Rome ultimately bled to death at the very foot of the statue of Pompey, his greatest defeated rival.
In mere moments, the bloody deed was complete. Caesar fell. But that relief we desperately expected, it never came. Instead, his death shocked the Republic to its very core. We really thought we were hitting the reset button on our democracy. But in reality, actually, scratch that. We were just triggering the final set of dominoes that would inevitably lead to the birth of the Roman Empire. The Republic we tried so hard to save basically died right alongside him on those cold marble floors.
Section 6. Savior or Destroyer of Rome.
Over 2,000 years later, the name Caesar is still known around the globe. His ambition, his military victories, and his unparalleled influence on history remain absolutely undeniable. I mean, very few individuals ever managed to change the course of human civilization so drastically in a single lifetime. So, as we close this explainer, I want to leave you with a profound question. It's one that still haunts the ghost of our Senate. Did assassinating the dictator actually save our fragile republic, or did the conspiracy ultimately strike the final blow that destroyed it forever? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into history.